the interesting thing, and they acknowledge this in the document, is so on the one hand, if you could find people and get there and prove them beyond a reasonable doubt. What's important, I think, to recognize is that when these victims come forward, and this is where what kind of truth becomes relevant, because while there can be certain moral truths but the standard they use to make a finding that someone was a victim and that somebody was a perpetrator is what they called a balance of probabilities. Now that can't be a conviction. So you need to have in any system, including the South African system, where they're coming out of a system that didn't follow the rule of law. Now they have to follow the rule of law, and that says that you can't convict somebody of a crime unless you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And well, it's a darn shame, and it is. Like, not all these people could. A lot of the people who got amnesty couldn't have gone to prison under any legal system. But the interesting thing is, at the same time, some of them could have. And so while they're invoking international law as their definition for what a gross violation of human rights is, under any international law under like a number of treaties which they cite as their source of authority, these guys couldn't get amnesty. Like, so to the extent that some people could have been proven guilty, which there could have been plenty of people who could have, if you're going to follow international law, then they can't get amnesty. Then they have to be in prison. So it's kind of like, again, they don't know. They probably, they couldn't have prosecuted everybody, but they could have prosecuted some people.
So what was the purpose behind all of it? Just to get people to admit what happened?
I think it was, just to get information out there and see if they could get a look like, where are they now? Like, I mean, because I know that it's still a very violent country.
Well, our guest speaker today was hinting at people were saying that they need to come back. Didn't you talk about that? Like how they need to bring it back, or maybe it wasn't, I guess, used as how it should be, like to the extent like it didn't have like a lasting effect. They said they wanted to bring it back, but like while it was in progress, I think it was regarded as successful.
But I had some thought about like the negative aspect about it, which was not touched on by the reading. But I had some personal thought, like not only victims but also perpetrators, right? Criminals and victims. They both were, or they could have taken advantage of the policy itself. For example, if the victim and perpetrator, they partner up together and say that you just, because it's all based on statements, verbal statements. So say you got hurt and you're supposed to get beneficial finances support or whatever from the government, but you could have just said that I'm the one who hurt her and she got hurt and she needs to get some money from the government, and you just get out of that based on the verbal statements, and you can split up the money that the virtual victim gets from the money that she gets from the government and stuff like that. Yeah. I think there's a lot of potential.
Well,
that is a good point. I mean, they did try to corroborate stories with like sources who you didn't know. Or I mean, they made efforts, but it's almost like with the volume, it's like hopefully that never happened, but it wouldn't be surprising if it at least in one case did, or if somebody really they talk about, and this is not to minimize victims at all, but a lot of people, they said, testified based on what they heard. And, I mean, that's also not admissible in a court, or it is, but it's, under consideration of, it's not as a matter of fact. It's like, that's kind of...
Yeah, most
people, the thing that I kind of think, though, is people always appreciate money.
Well, that's what he said.
But I mean,
something
like,
that,
are you asking, did like R&R like actually like find houses and like set up like like these nice like?
Or was it kind of just they like threw money at people and were like, hey?
Well, that was part of the
think
debate. That was part of the debate was, do we just provide people with the services? And this is like an often debate with a lot of aspects of government administrative programs. Is do you give people the services? And just say, like, the equivalent of almost like a food stamp, where it's just like, you're going to use it for this, like, here's where the counseling is, or do you give people the money? And so there's, I think the approach that they took and the reasoning behind it was good. It said, well, part of what we're doing is helping people move beyond victimhood. If we just hold their hand through all these things. One, it just adds cost to the program because you need a
Sure.
bureaucracy to administer it,
Yeah.
and they're not, they're already going to be paying out a lot of money, and so let's cut some of that money that's going to the bureaucracy and to the government, essentially through itself. I mean, all money that goes back in the economy from the government never gets there usually because it goes through all these channels. Let's give the money to people and show them it was part of showing that like you're a person, like we trust you to do this, and then ultimately if you try to have a cookie cutter package like here's the treatment you need, it's like, well, no, I don't. I just need to go buy that. I think it's for more.
I mean, economically, I think it was definitely a smart move to just give them money.
So what
But
were
they
the other two?
like
Oh, go ahead.
specifically try to formulate policy proposals and recommendations on rehabilitation and healing of survivors and their families and communities at large. Under R&R committee, he said, from
What,
the official website.
what were the other two though?
Um,
The Amnesty Committee, obviously, that one's obvious.
And then the
And
human
HRV,
rights
yeah, human rights
violations
So-
committee.
Did they just determine like what was atrocious and what wasn't?
I have for human rights, this involved the committee hearing gruesome testimony from victims.
and that's the first step that they go through.
Yeah, so they
Yeah.
had
So was it like human rights, Amnesty?
No, human
Alright.
rights, and then reparation and rehabilitation.
yeah.
and
Well,
then
the,
Yeah.
the order is, I mean, there was just
I'm just
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, so they basically they had a very statutorily narrow thing of what they could have findings on, so they couldn't look at gross mistreatment, but they did end up like documenting it and just like saying like, okay, it's not a finding technically, but it's obviously worth noting. So the ones that I think, if I remember correctly, there was torture, abduction, murder,
Disappearance
yeah,
and
Yeah.
abductions.
yeah, and then like one like abusive or
It said severe ill
Right.
treatment.
severe ill treatment.
That was
Yeah.
one of those language things that I was gonna say during class
Yeah.
today. Like, what constitutes something as severe or not severe?
Yeah,